Hey, Jeff Santoro, it's getting close to the end of the year. Here we are coasting into mid-September, starting to take a look at stocks that investors may want to be buying before the end of the year, rounding out their portfolios as we head into 2025.
Yeah, I like to look at stocks that I still have high conviction in, but have maybe been whacked by the market for reasons that I think might be exaggerated. And that's the direction I'm going. But it's certainly two good stocks to look at here.
Yeah, I've got a stock I'm going to talk about that's actually been going up, and there's some real clear momentum in the business. But one of those stocks that got caught up in the hype of space stocks, but it's one of the few that's actually delivering and has what looks like some real economic moats. I'm Jason Hall. This is Investing Unscripted. He is Jeff Santoro. This video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. If you're looking for even more great stock ideas, we got two good ones for you here. You get 10 more. Go to our special link. It's fool.com/unscripted. Go to that special link and you can get access to The Motley Fool's 10 best stocks to buy right now. Again, fool.com/unscripted. Going to keep it up on the video the whole time. You'll be able to go to it as soon as you're done with us. Go check out that link. Okay, how about you go first?
So the stock I'm thinking of is Celsius Holdings, which is an energy drink company. It's probably one that a lot of people have heard of. It's been popular in the social media Twitter sphere, but it's really come on some hard times over the last couple months. In fact, over the last 6 months, it's down more than 60%, knocking the stock price back to where it was in the summer of 2023. I still think there's a lot of potential here. You could argue the stock got ahead of itself, but it was putting up triple digit growth for several quarters in a row. So I can understand why there is some exuberance. If you have high conviction in the company, now sounds like a good time to take a look at it. That stock drop is offering a much better buying opportunity for long-term believers in the stock. The two big reasons I think it's worth taking a look at, most people probably know this, but a couple years ago, Pepsi became their primary distributor, which really opened up a ton of new markets and opportunities for the product to be put in front of consumers. And a large part of the stock drop has been just supply choppiness in terms of Pepsi bought too much and now it has too much and now it's trying to sell down its inventory, which could just be a mistake, but also one that it's going to resolve. There's no evidence that people are drinking less of the product or like it any less. So to me, this feels like a short term thing that will get resolved over time. I like to think Pepsi knows what it's doing when it comes to distribution. So to me, this seems like a short term headwind. But the biggest thing I'm keeping an eye on, and the reason I'm bullish on the company, is the international opportunity here. International revenue is still a very small part of Celsius's overall revenue, but this is really where the Pepsi distribution network is going to come into play. And just to put some quick numbers around it, since since Q4 of 2019, European revenue has grown at a 22% compound annual growth rate, Asia Pacific revenue 37%, and other geography out of the United States revenue is growing at 155% CAGR. So that's just, and that goes back to 2019, but that goes back before the Pepsi deal. So that they're just getting started with the international opportunity. So to me, if you believe in the drink and as a product that people want to buy, I see it everywhere. And you can live through some of this choppiness with the Pepsi buying issues, and you believe in the long-term growth potential of the international opportunity, I think it's a stock worth looking at before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things here too. From a valuation perspective, it's certainly not cheap,
Right.
but now it's generating earnings. And on an earnings basis, considering the growth rate and the potential, there's a lot to like. I think a good comp is thinking about Monster Beverage revenue, $7.5 billion or so in revenue over the past 4 quarters versus less than 1.5 for Celsius, which is again remarkable growth considering where the business was even 5 years ago, but it's still substantially smaller in terms of the business and the opportunity. So I think you're onto something. The way I think about it, it's maybe not one to back up the truck on. Maybe a good time to nibble a little bit, start a position, maybe add a little bit to a position. What do you think about that?
I agree. I mean, there's still some risk here. With any consumer facing product, there's always the risk of, will people change their mind at some point? Like, it's easy to look back at Monster Beverage and say, oh, it's been the best performing stock of the last 35 years. Celsius is on that same path. That's not necessarily true. The stars might have just aligned with Monster when it came to the market. The evidence is there that it's going to continue to grow, but there is every chance in the world that There's a lot of competitors in this space, and who knows, maybe Celsius is hot right now, but isn't in a year. And that's certainly a risk. I agree with you. This is not one to back up the truck on, but certainly worth maybe dollar cost averaging into as you get better buying opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, I'm going to bring something completely different to the table here. We're talking about Rocket Lab. So again, this is a space stock, as the name says, and it got caught up in a lot of the hype where we've seen tons of other space stocks, Virgin Galactic and others that went to the moon, but man, they got caught up in the Earth's gravity and came back hard. Rocket was not excluded from that. Yes, I know, terrible, terrible pun
Terrible
there.
pun, but we'll just move on.
Gonna keep rolling with it here. But here's the key that's so exciting to me about Rocket Lab, and we'll talk about it in a minute. If you look at the results, their revenue is continuing to grow. They're signing lots of contracts. It looks like they have some real competitive advantages with what their offer is, what they bring to the market for customers looking to deploy satellites. So we'll get into that in a minute. But first thing I want to show here is just kind of what Rocket Lab is. It describes itself as an end-to-end space company. So what does that mean? First of all, you've got to get there. So the actual rockets themselves, they engineer and build the rockets. And of course, you need the actual spacecraft. A lot of people don't realize that typically the rocket and the spacecraft they're not typically, they're always separate things, right? And often the rocket doesn't leave the Earth's atmosphere, it doesn't actually enter into orbit. So they build spacecraft. The spacecraft will deploy things in space and can be used for maybe you want to do scientific research and put equipment on there to take measurements. So they have the spacecraft, and again, you want to use space, you're going to need to either have people, automation, systems in space and connecting back to the Earth. And this is the third phase of what the folks at Rocket Lab are looking to build. One of the things that I really like a ton about Rocket Labs, Jeff, is you look at Rocket Lab, the management founders, these are engineers, a ton of people that have been involved with NASA. So they actually understand like how difficult it is to actually do what they're doing. And that's, I think, really valuable. The thing that I like about the business itself and what they've done is they've really built some competitive advantages. Their ability to go from project beginning to getting into orbit to getting into space, they can do it faster than anybody else. And also, the hardest problem with space is weight. Every weight of payload that you add, you have to add an order of magnitude of fuel, right? And you need thrust. So everything gets harder and more expensive the more weight it is. And they've done a really good job of kind of focusing on small, and it's really worked out pretty well. I've got one more thing I want to share here and just talk about the financial trajectory, because again, space is hard and it's expensive. And historically, the contractors that have been involved in space before, the big aerospace companies, big defense companies, largely, yeah, they're government contractors, right? They've figured out the code there. We're seeing more and more launches or private launches because companies are wanting satellites in space, private organizations, not just the government that has led the charge of space globally over the past 70 years or so. Here's how it's starting to work. You go back to the IPO, revenue has consistently grown. And again, still seeing cash burn, but the cash burn is starting. There's signs that it's starting to improve. And the most recent results don't include a recent deal with NASA that is going to provide a substantial amount of revenue and also help it start deploying more at scale, right? So again, I don't think that this is a low risk or a zero risk stock, but I think it's really compelling if you're looking across kind of the landscape of space businesses. There's some private companies out there that are doing good things. And then you have some of the giants like the ULA, which is the joint venture between Boeing and I believe Lockheed Martin. So you got two giants, aerospace giants that are involved. Boeing, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Lockheed Martin, I'm not interested in, because if you're thinking about taking advantage of the opportunity of space, it's such a small part of their business that it's not really a needle moving thing. I think Rocket Lab is probably the only that's clearly investable to me of the space stocks that are out there. I think now is a really good time to buying it because we're seeing that trajectory on their business.
Yeah. And I would add to that, it's not a publicly traded company, but SpaceX has proven that there can be a viable consumer private business that does all the space things that NASA used to do. So if Rocket Lab can continue to do well and take some of that market share, we look, fast forward 10, 15 years, maybe we're looking at a duopoly between those two companies handling most of the space rocket travel stuff.
Space rocket travel stuff.
I think that's a technical term.